Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Sparkly Heretic, and welcome to the Heretic Happy Hour. I've got two friends with me, two heretics, Jonah Dempcy, 5'1", and Mark Germain, a 3'5". And I was lucky enough to get them both at the same time, as I know they're both very busy. And I had a couple questions for them, and I thought it was so interesting, especially their answers, that I said, let's just record this. And I can go ahead and put it up on YouTube. And so the subject is channeling. And let's start. Well, first of all, what are you guys drinking? It's happy hour, but it's only like, what time is it? It's like 11:30 a.m., which is never too early for me, but I don't know.
I'm drinking a delicious Ethiopian Kova coffee from Portland, Oregon, I believe, in my friend's My Eyes cup. So,
Oh, and is there a sweetener in there or?
no, just black.
Oh,
It's
how do you
delicious.
do that?
It is delicious.
My coffee is usually like a cup full of cream with a dab of coffee. How about you, Mark?
Well, I do hot water neat. Just plain hot water.
What kind of glass?
Oh, right now it's in my
Oh,
keep it
okay.
nice and hot, double insulated walled container with another insulator on top of that.
Any
Gotta keep it hot.
double protection?
Yeah, double protection just in case, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well,
It is happy
with
hour.
you, I know. You do have that third line, so
Yes, well, could be bumping in all kinds of things.
Exactly. Well, I am drinking a big thing of water from my Aloha Miami mug that I bought in Hawaii. That was like $50, just because they
50.
overprice everything.
Yeah, I think you got a really good deal on that.
I think so too. I have dropped it about 50 times, but I refuse to ever get rid of it because it was so expensive. I have to get my money's worth.
Well, if you ever need anything, I got a lot of stuff I can sell you real cheap.
Okay. 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 So let's get into it. Mediumship. Who, Mark, you used to be a medium, or you used to channel, or what's your experience with channeling?
Yeah, well, I was a trained intuitive healer who did channeling, who did medium work, who talked to this, talked to that. So I've done a lot of different things, but that was mostly prior to human design. And as human design went on, a lot of that stuff went away. Except I still use my intuition while I'm guiding, as a projector, what things to say, where to go, stuff like that.
Right. And why did it go away?
I just think for me, it was something that as a 3/5, I was meant to experience deeply. But then in the end, it wasn't part of my continuing practice. I think mechanics became the thing. So therefore the thing didn't have much space for other things.
Okay.
And so that's primarily the reason, I believe. Who knows?
Yeah. And how did you discover that you could do this? How old were you? What happened?
It was actually I saw on my way out of a gym a magazine in the lobby vestibule on the way out that said, come see a New Life Expo in Manhattan. Some psychics and other things that really interested me. And I went that weekend and I was waiting to listen to this psychic, and they had other classes, and I got to take a class that they had there for part of the admission. It was on the chakras, the tree of life, the auric field, the universal computer. It was by Peter Roth. And from that on, a couple nights later, I went into Manhattan in a snowstorm, and there it began. And like he said, it was launched out of a cannon. So I was just something that just really just exploded, and I was able to do a lot of things very quickly, and
Right.
learned a lot of things very quickly.
What do you have the channel dude 5734?
No,
What?
no, no. The intuition in a chart can come from a lot of different places.
Okay. Okay.
Can come from different channels and gates. It can come from the tones. It can come from a lot of different areas where you can get color. There's a lot of different areas where you can have intuitive insights, knowing. I'm a
Yeah.
knower. So it's just things I know, I see, I hear. Um, it's all part of the design. It's not just the 5710 or
Right.
20 or any of those 57, the gentle, which is the intuitive clarity of the now. That that is part of it and is part of the intuition uh, uh, stream, but it's more than just that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm extremely intuitive, and it started for me really, really kicking up a notch. I want to say probably about 7 months ago when I stopped taking medication after a surgery, after post-op surgery. I was on a bunch of different medications, and I stopped taking it, and I started really, it was almost like getting downloads at night or something. It was really pretty wild, but I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then so Jonah, so before we hit record on this, actually this wasn't even meant to be recorded. It was just a conversation. And I was talking about a friend of mine who is a medium, and Jonah started talking about Ra. I told him that I woke up this morning and thought, God, wouldn't it be great if my friend could channel Ra? And then that started this whole conversation. So, Jonah, tell me, repeat what you said to me earlier about Ra having three different. Well, go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, this came up just the other day in the Human Design Catalyst Facebook group, and it was a question about Uru and Hu, because Ra was a little cagey about this, and he would say Uru and Hu were titles given to him and so on. But then in other places, he kind of revealed they weren't just titles. They were two different personality crystals. One was called Uru, and he has a whole talk about Uru, and then the other was Hu. And that was actually a point that was lost on me for many years. I thought Uru was the crystal, but Hu is just the title, the door closer, and so on. But he's actually very clear and explicitly states in the end of the Encounter with the Voice, which is the Encounter with the Voice is a really wonderful video. It's available on YouTube, and so you can watch the video, and he explains exactly what happens with this encounter with the voice. He talks about one of the personality crystals coming to him. He doesn't mention the second. But then if you watch after the credits, and a lot of people turn it off, but there's actually about 20 or 30 minutes more after the credits where there's kind of some interviews about it, and he starts saying, yeah, well, I had three personality crystals, and to have three crystals is pretty confusing for people, and I would communicate with them. And he is still a little bit ambiguous, because I almost wondered if he meant he has personality, a design crystal, and Uru. Like, is it just one crystal that visited him? But no, he does pretty clearly say he has three crystals anyway, that he would communicate with the other two, and that they devised a way of, but see, this was not channeling. So I guess what I was saying was more just,
Yeah.
in his encounter with the voice was not channeling either. But I, in my opinion, channeling is at least accessing the neutrino stream that's passing through a crystal of consciousness. And it's, the channeling is as much a creative act of the channeler as it is because the channeler is the only one who has the meat to actually create the self-reflected consciousness. The crystal is just mechanical. It's just a mechanism. The neutrinos are being filtered through it, and you can tap into them, and it's, that's not too far-fetched for me. But I think what happened with Ra wasn't that he was channeling Uru or Hu, and still to this day it's somewhat ambiguous whether he meant, when he said he had three crystals, his own personality crystal and Uru and Hu, or if Hu really was a title, as he said in other places. He said Hu meant the door closer. Mark, do you have any threads here that you've looked into? I know that this is kind of the not so
No,
practical side of it.
I mean, I haven't paid attention to that in a while. But yeah, there has been, like a lot of topics Rod discusses. You have to catch a lot of them to synthesize everything together to get a whole answer sometimes. But yeah, I'm with you on that, Jonah. I believe it was two, and some operated at different times, and one left at a certain time. And I forget which. But they are embedded in him. So that was like they was working with it, and things were emerging from that as time went on. So that's why people early in design said, "Oh, this is all the design Rod talked about, and that's it." But that's not the case, obviously, because things came after that that were always there, and some things emerged, and then also some things also just evolved. He was a messenger and a student and a teacher. So, and a lot of that came with those extra crystals involved too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And he did say, for instance, with the exaltations and detriments, that's one of the questions we get are, why are the exaltations and detriments this or that? And that was all from I think Uru primarily, because he kind of mentions that at one point, and that he'd actually devised a primitive language system using numbers where he could communicate with, I think these were primarily lights. You would see lights, but I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I guess my only idea about the channeling is just that the channeling is only going to be as good as the channel, and that the channel is going to put it through their system. I mean, the other question I get sometimes is, what about the law of one, where it's all channeled from an entity known as Ra? Was that the same as our Ra? Was that the same as the Ra personality crystal that and the thing is that material is so drastically different from human design. It seems to have almost nothing to do with it. There's not a lot of parallels, and yet I could see how that could be the same personality crystal, possibly. I don't know, but
Actually, Jonah, I was a person who emailed you or messaged you about that.
well, you're
I
definitely one of them. I've had
I
about
was one of them
50
because I'm like,
people
what is
message
this?
me.
I was
Oh,
just
it
like,
comes up all the
yeah,
time. It comes up every week or
I was
two. I
like,
mean,
what is
it's
this?
yeah, and I used to read the Law of One materials when I was a teenager, so I was quite familiar with them going into human design, and that was one of my first questions: was, is this the same Ra? And I
Yeah,
don't really have an unequivocal answer. I think it is, but I think it also shows that the personality crystal is not self-reflected consciousness. It's simply a filter of consciousness. So the people who channel the Law of One material got a very different set of information as when that same personality crystal potentially was in form as Ra, as our Ra.
okay,
And they are personality crystals themselves. I mean, filters.
Absolutely.
Each person's a filter. So
Mhm.
they're filtered depending on where they are in their context. It's only going to be able to filter the information in a certain way. At least that's my own personal experience of doing it a number of times and being around a lot of people who have, is that you're always going to have a limitation based on the information coming and based on the receiver.
Mhm.
right.
So there's always a limitation somewhat
Yeah,
in the messaging.
it's a good point as well. I had an Akashic Records reader. I had a reading gifted to me some years back, and she wasn't able to get anything. It was almost like, oh, it must be your first life. You don't really have, it's just kind of blank, empty, nothing. And then I had another Akashic Records reader who was able to confirm a lot of what I'd already known from my own recall and access to the Akashic Records. But she was a much higher level of initiation, or however you want to look at it. It's unfortunate that these minds love comparing, and so if you talk about levels of initiation, it's it becomes something to be proud of, that you've reached this or that level, and it's not
Right.
about that. It's simply, as Mark is saying, we can only really access what we have the capacity for, and different people have different capacities. And so the first Akashic Records reader didn't have the capacity to access anything about me. The second one did. Now, that first one had the capacity to access a lot of information about a lot of people, just not myself. I was
Right.
kind of like almost like a CIA agent in the Akashic Records who had confidential records, that couldn't be accessed by people who didn't have certain levels of clearance and so on.
Well, you got to put on the right channel, right? So to get the right
Exactly.
program.
Yeah.
Well,
Look for the
let me
right
ask you
channel.
a question. Let me ask you a question, just in a very simple, for people who don't know a lot about personality crystals, or okay, I talk to a medium. She gives me a message from my dead mother. What's happening?
I mean, in my opinion, is probably accessing the personality crystal of your mother, even if that crystal has already reincarnated in a different form.
Okay.
Your mother could be reincarnated and going about her day and not noticing anything. And because the personality crystal is essentially just a filter, it's a filter of neutrinos, and it doesn't interact.
But
I mean, yeah, that's kind of how I
the
see
only,
it.
the only problem with it that I see potentially, because it is an interesting conundrum for me over the years of how I've dealt and looked at this subject matter, because mechanically speaking, it can mean something else. I mean, personality crystal does not have, according to Ra, according to the voice, have any personality, so to speak, when it's not in body. So, and what are we filtering to? Are we filtering road crystal bundles or the bundles or the most likely, if that's what's happening? And does that change it because they're in part of a rogue crystal bundle, or they're just rogue crystals? They haven't met
Yeah,
up
I
in a
would think that
bundle
would
yet.
I think that would definitely
Um,
change it. And yeah, and that's a really good point, is that if that rogue crystal bundles are when the personality crystal doesn't reincarnate, it kind of gets glommed together
it
with a
gets
bunch of
stuck here on this
others.
plane because it didn't have Bardo.
Okay.
And Bardo's a stage where you need at least up to 72 hours for the body basically not to be disturbed in any fashion. So
Okay.
if you don't get that, which most people don't because of customs, because where they die, how they autopsies, all kinds of different reasons, they usually don't get Bardo. So a lot of these entity crystals get are loose and they stay in the lower atmospheres along the land. And meanwhile, there's uh, source crystal bundles that is where you return back to potentially possibly reincarnate if that's part of the plan. But then
Okay.
you need a certain level of ability to, and fortuitous trajectory to have that happen. Like Rod died at his home in Ibiza. Now, if he died in, say, on a plane going from here to there on a train, or he was in his place in Toronto or something like that, that he had a kind of, that might not have been the case. So there is some kind of
Right.
serendipity that you
Um,
need. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But
just a quick
the
comment. We're getting kicked off Zoom, so let's pick this back up. I can recreate. There's a limit on more than two people in a Zoom. So
um,
it says less than a minute left. It just popped up with an alert. So
yeah.
shall we just pick this back up, pick it up with Roz?
Sure.